The world outside your window is loud, fast, and demanding. But here, the centuries are quiet. Before we begin our journey through the echoes of the past, take a slow, deliberate moment to reach out and dim the lights, letting the sharp edges of your room soften into long, gentle shadow. Adjust your position, feel the weight of your blankets, and allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears. You are no longer required to be productive, to be alert, or to be anywhere else but here. This is our pact. I will be your guide through the twilight of history, and you simply have to let go. If your eyes close before the first chapter ends, let them. The stories will continue to flow around you like a calm, ancient river, carrying you toward the deep, restorative rest you deserve. Tonight, we are not just looking at dates on a timeline. We are stepping into the quiet resonance of lived experience. We are going to explore the remarkable tapestry of the human spirit, a journey through the fragility that makes us vulnerable, and the hidden, unbreakable strength that allows us to endure. Our path tonight is a long and winding one, designed to lead your mind away from the stresses of the present. We will begin in the high-stakes, hushed corridors of 20th century power, looking past the glamour to the silent battles of a man who found his greatest strength in the solitude of a sickbed. From there, we will drift toward the mist-covered highlands of ancient Ethiopia, tracing the scent of a wild berry that sparked a global revolution of the mind. As the night deepens, we will travel further back, standing in the cold, candlelit chapels of medieval Europe, to witness a squire's lonely, vigilant moment where raw violence was transformed into a sacred code of honor. And finally, we will explore the very alchemy of clarity itself, the history of glass, a material born of fire and sand that eventually taught us how to see the star, and, more importantly, how to see ourselves. Each of these chronicles is a sanctuary of sorts. They are stories of persistence, of craft, and of the quiet decisions that change the world while everyone else is sleeping. History is often taught as a series of loud explosions and grand proclamations, but the history that truly matters is often whispered. It is the sound of a fountain pen scratching across a document in the dead of night. It is the crackle of a fire in a 17th century coffee house. It is the rhythmic strike of a hammer on a knight's armor, or the steady breath of a glassblower as he shapes a vision out of molten heat. These are the rhythms we will follow tonight. We are looking for the boring parts, the slow, steady movements of time that provide the foundation for everything we know. In these long stretches of endurance and evolution, there is a profound sense of peace. There is a realization that the world has turned for thousands of years before us, and it will continue to turn, steady and certain, while we sleep. Take another breath now, deeper this time. Feel the stillness of the room settling into your bones. The external world is retreating, its colors fading into a monochromatic piece. Think of the millions of people who have stared at the same moon throughout history, seeking the same rest, the same quiet. You are part of that long, human tradition tonight. You are safe, tucked away from the currents of modern life, protected by the vast distance of the years we are about to traverse. The shadows dancing on your ceiling are not distractions. They are the silent companions to the stories waiting to be told. We begin our journey in the heart of the 20th century, in an era defined by grand myths and flickering television screens. But behind the bright lights of the presidency and the roar of the crowds, there was a more private story unfolding, one of a thin, sickly boy who spent his youth lost in tales of ancient heroism. He was a man who understood that true power is not found in the absence of pain, but in the quiet resilience required to face it every single day. Let us travel back to a world of shifting political tides and hushed conversation, to the making of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a leader who learned the art of command in the silence of the South Pacific and the weight of a world teetering on the edge. The first chapter of our night begins now, in the quiet strength of a man who knew how to wait for the dawn. John Fitzgerald Kennedy entered the world on a quiet, unremarkable spring morning, May 29, 1917, in the suburban stillness of Brookline, Massachusetts. To the neighbors passing by the modest house on Beale Street, it was simply the home of an ambitious, growing family. But inside those walls, a story was beginning that would eventually reach the furthest corners of the globe. Jack, as he was known to those who loved him, was the second son born into a lineage of Irish-American power, the child of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Fitzgerald. To look at him then, a small infant in a cradle of privilege, one might have assumed his life would be a seamless glide through the halls of wealth. But his birth seemed destined for greatness and struggle in equal measure, for from the very start, Jack's life was anything but easy. What the public would later admire as effortless charisma and ironclad strength was, in truth, a fortress built upon a lifetime of silent battles, with illness and the crushing weight of expectation. While the world outside was beginning to roar with the energy of the 20th century, Jack's world was often defined by the four walls of a sick room. As a child, he was frail, his immune system battered by one ailment after another. At the age of 3, he contracted scarlet fever, a nearly fatal disease in 1900, and 20 that brought his small life to a terrifying standstill. Imagine that room, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun, the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway, and the soft, rhythmic sound of a damp cloth being dipped in cool water to soothe a fever that wouldn't break. For weeks, the vibrant noise of his siblings in the nursery became a distant, muffled echo. Jack lived in a world of silence and shadow, where time didn't move in hours, but in the slow cooling of a bowl of broth or the gradual shift of light across a white ceiling. As you listen to the steady cadence of my voice, allow your own room to feel just as quiet, just as safe. You are tucked away from the demands of the world, much like Jack was in those long months of recovery. But where many would have found only boredom or despair, Jack found a gateway. Because his body could not run on the athletic fields with his robust older brother, Joe Jr., his mind learned to travel through the pages of books. He read voraciously, losing himself in the grand, sweeping arcs of ancient history. He walked with the heroes of the Iliad, debated with the philosophers of Greece, and stood on the decks of wooden ships as they navigated unknown seas. In these stories of heroism and endurance, he found a mirror for his own internal architecture of courage. He was learning how to be alone without being lonely, how to inhabit the silence, and how to build a world of the mind that no fever could touch. The Kennedy household was an intense, competitive environment, presided over by a father whose ambition was a towering figure in itself. Joe Sr. made his fortune in finance and film, but his true legacy was the path he paved for his sons. Joe Jr. was the star, athletic, handsome, and robust, the one everyone assumed was destined for the presidency. Jack, by contrast, was smaller, thinner, and less physically robust. He lived in a constant state of comparison, yet within that fragility grew something more potent, a quiet inner resilience that deepened with every hospital stay and every setback. At Coati, his prep school, he became known for a mischievous charm and a dry, sharp wit, a sophisticated shield that hid the chronic back pain and the mysterious ailments that continued to puzzle his doctor. No one suspected that this sickly second son would one day hold the nuclear codes or charm the world with a smile that masked decades of physical agony. He was learning the most valuable lesson a leader can possess: how to endure. Breathe in that sense of endurance now. Feel the air moving in and out, a slow and steady current that connects you to the quiet strength of the past. The boy in the library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and the smell of old paper, was preparing for a destiny he couldn't yet see. He was building the pact of his own life, the agreement that pain would be a companion, but never a master. You are safe in the stillness of your own bed, protected by the same silence that once cradled a future president. The external world is a distant murmur, and for now, there is only the slow, rhythmic turning of the pages of history. As the 1930s drew to a close, and the world began to tremble with the approach of global war, John F.B. Kennedy stood at a significant crossroads in his young life. He had graduated from Harvard in 1940 with a thesis titled Why England Slept, an analysis of the world on the brink of catastrophe that surprisingly became a bestseller. While most sons of such immense privilege might have used their status to find a safe, comfortable post in academia or diplomacy, Jack's heart was set on a different path. He wanted to be in the center of the storm, despite a back so fragile that Navy doctors initially rejected his application. He pushed forward, using every ounce of his family's influence not to avoid the fight, but to secure a place where the wind was coldest. He was determined not just to watch history unfold from the sidelines, but to shape it with his own hands. In 1943, Lieutenant Kennedy was sent to the South Pacific, a landscape defined by vast, ink-black oceans and the sudden, sharp violence of war. Imagine the scene as you drift deeper into relaxation. The air is thick with humidity and the sharp scent of salt, and the only sound is the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the engine of his patrol torpedo boat, PT-109. It was a small, fast craft that felt like a tiny splinter on the surface of the massive, indifferent Pacific. On the night of August 2nd, the darkness was absolute. There were no stars to guide them, no moon to break the gloom of the deep water. Suddenly, out of the shadows, the towering, ghostly silhouette of a Japanese destroyer, the Amagari, appeared like a nightmare in the mist. Before the crew could even shout a warning, the massive steel bow sliced through wooden PT-109, cutting the boat in two in a violent eruption of splinters and fuel. This was the moment where the legend of JFK was truly born, not from a podium or a televised speech, but from the sweat, grit, and the dark silence of the sea. As he was thrown into the oil-slicked water, his back, already battered by years of chronic pain, was jarred by the impact. But as he bobbed in the swells, the discipline of the sickroom returned to him. He did not panic. He gathered his surviving crew members, calling out names through the darkness until he accounted for everyone he could reach. One sailor, Patrick McMahon, was too badly burned to swim on his own. Without a second thought for his own agonizing back, Jack took the life jacket strap of the wounded man between his teeth, clenching his jaw until it ached, and began to swim. For more than 3 long miles, he pulled the weight of another human being through the rolling swells of the ocean. Think of the rhythm of his strokes, slow, steady, and relentless. The salt water stung his eyes, and the sheer exhaustion threatened to pull him into the depths. But he kept moving, stroke by stroke, breath by breath. He reached a small uninhabited island, and for the next 6 days, he led his men through a grueling survival ordeal, living on coconuts and the sheer, unbreakable will to return home. For his leadership and quiet courage, he was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. But the deeper impact was internal. He had faced death and survived, proving to himself that the fragile boy from Brookline could hold the weight of men's lives in his hands. Pause here and listen to the internal rhythm of that survival. The ocean is vast, but your breath is certain, like the waves hitting the shore of that distant island. Your breath comes and goes in and out. You are safe. The water is far away, and the warmth of your room is your only reality. Jack had finally found the hero he had read about in the library. He returned home, a war hero, but the transition to the world of politics was marked by a new, heavy mantle of responsibility. His older brother, Joe Jr., had been killed in the war, and the destiny of the family now fell squarely on Jack's shoulders. His father, Joe Sr., wasted no time, seeing the window of opportunity wide open. If Joe Jr. had been the plan, Jack was now the destiny, and the political machine began to turn with Jack at its very center. The Kennedy mystique that captivated America was a masterpiece of poise and restraint, a carefully maintained image of youth, vigor, and effortless energy that hid a private reality of constant medication and recurring, agonizing surgeries. Even as he rose through the House of Representatives and the Senate, winning over voters with his genuine intensity and sharp intellect, he was fighting a silent war with his own body. He suffered from Addison's disease, a dangerous adrenal disorder, and spinal problems that often left him near death. Yet, the public knew almost nothing. He mastered the new medium of television, appearing cool, collected, and magnetic under the hot studio lights of the 1960 debates, while his opponent, Richard Nixon, appeared harried and worn. At 43, he became the youngest man ever elected president, and his inauguration in January 1961 drew massive crowds who were hungry for his vision of a new frontier. His words, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," became a call to action that inspired a generation to believe in something larger than themselves. But the presidency is a house of heavy shadows. Within months, he faced the failure of the Bay of Pigs, a deep humiliation that taught him to be wary of overconfident advisors and to take full public responsibility for defeat. He was learning that leadership in the nuclear age required a different kind of courage, the courage to be still. The true test of his soul came in October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, the world stood closer to the edge of nuclear annihilation than it ever had before. Imagine the tension in the Oval Office, the air thick with the smell of coffee, the low, urgent murmur of advisors, and the constant rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. His military commanders urged him to strike, to unleash the fire, but Kennedy remembered the silence of the sea after his boat went down. He knew that once the first shot is fired, the path of history is no longer in human hands. He chose restraint. He chose the slow, agonizing path of diplomacy and a naval quarantine, navigating the delicate ego of the Soviet leadership through secret letters until war was averted. It was his defining moment of survival through wisdom. As you drift closer to sleep, think of the quiet after that storm. The world continued to turn, and in the center of it all was a man who had learned the value of a single, peaceful breath. In his final year, his vision expanded towards civil rights, embracing the moral argument for equality that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. championed at the March on Washington. He challenged a nation to land a man on the moon, pushing the boundaries of what a free society could achieve when it dared to dream. When it dared to dream. He lived with constant pain hidden from the public eye, yet he pressed forward with charm and hope, knowing that time for all of us is finite. The room is still now. The night is deep. The history of the 20th century is a distant murmur, a long, fading echo. You are safe in the present, grounded in the comfort of your own rest, while the legacy of resilience continues to glow like a faint star in the night sky. From the silent battles of a president, we move toward a different kind of warmth, one that has traveled across deserts and oceans for centuries, carried by traders and dreamers alike. It is the scent of the earth and the quiet comfort of a ritual that connects us all. We turn now toward the sensory history of a humble being that stirred the world into wakefulness long before the modern age began. The transition is seamless, a slow drift from the heavy weight of command to the gentle, rising aroma of a journey that began in the ancient, sun-drenched highlands of Ethiopia. As we move deeper into the quiet hours of the night, let the salt spray of the South Pacific and the distant roar of political crowds begin to recede from your mind. Take a slow, deep breath, feeling the air move steadily through you, grounding you in the absolute safety of the present moment. You are not in the path of a storm. You are the calm, protected center of it. The history we are traversing is like a long, slow-moving river, and we are simply floating upon its surface, cushioned by the distance of decades and the soft comfort of your surroundings. The heavy weight of the world that once rested on the shoulders of leaders is now just a distant echo, a series of shadows dancing gently on the walls of time. You are safe. You are at rest. Your room is a sanctuary, and the stories of the past are here to cradle your mind, providing a rhythmic, predictable backdrop to your own journey towards sleep. In October 1962, the world encountered a moment that felt as though time itself had slowed to a heart-stopping, heavy crawl. For 13 long, agonizing days, the survival of the human collective hung in a delicate, precarious balance during what we now call the Cuban Missile Crisis. It did not begin with a loud explosion, but with the quiet click of a camera shutter. High-altitude U-2O spy planes soaring far above the white, puffy clouds where the air is thin and silent captured a series of still images. When these photographs were developed in hushed rooms in Washington, they revealed unmistakable evidence. The Soviet Union was installing nuclear missile sites just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. These were missiles that, once operational, could strike nearly every major city in the United States in a matter of minutes. The stakes were no longer about borders or ideologies. They were about the very breath of every person on the planet. Imagine the atmosphere inside the Oval Office during those 13 days. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood, the faint metallic tang of ink, and the persistent, bitter aroma of dark coffee. Outside, the world continued its frantic pace, but inside this room, the only sound was the low, urgent murmur of advisors and the constant, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock against the wall. Every second felt magnified. The men known as XCOM gathered in secrecy, their faces pale under the yellow glow of the lamps, deciding the fate of billions. Many within that room, men who had spent their lives studying the mechanics of war, urged for immediate, decisive action era, strikes that would light up the horizon, followed by a full-scale invasion. They spoke in the sharp, clipped language of force, but in the center of that swirling, high-pressure vortex sat John F. Kennedy. He was a man who carried the silence of the dark Pacific waters within him. He remembered the sound of his boat splitting in two, the taste of oil in his mouth, and the sheer, terrifying weight of having men's lives depend entirely on his next move. He also remembered the spectacular, clumsy failure of the Bay of Pigs just a year prior, a lesson in how easily grand plans can crumble when fueled by overconfidence. Kennedy understood a truth that the architects of war often overlook. He knew how quickly things could spiral into chaos when judgment is clouded by aggression. And so, he chose a different path, one that required more courage than any airstrike. He chose the path of careful, calculated restraint. He ordered a naval quarantine, a soft word for a hard reality designed to signal resolve while leaving a small, vital window. For nearly 2 weeks, the entire planet seemed to hold its collective breath. Across every continent, families sat by their radios and televisions, watching the same flickering, grainy images, waiting for a signal that the world would either find its way back to peace or descend into the fire. In Washington, Kennedy maintained a calm, poised face for the public, even as he privately battled the immense weight of every telegram and every intelligence report. He knew that one single misstep, one misread message, or one impulsive order could lead to a tragedy from which there would be no recovery. In the absolute stillness of your own room right now, consider the profound power of that waiting. True leadership, as Kennedy discovered in those long, sleepless nights, is not always found in the loudest voice or the swiftest strike. It is found in the ability to be still. It is the wisdom to listen to the silence between the threats. It is the capacity to allow an opponent a path to back down without losing their dignity, seeking survival through wisdom rather than victory through force. In a remarkable, quiet exchange of secret letters, a deal was finally struck. The Soviet missiles would be dismantled and removed in exchange for a promise of peace. The clock, which had been ticking so loudly toward midnight, finally slowed down. The missiles were withdrawn, and the world was allowed to continue its steady, ancient turn toward the sun. As the intense tension of 1962 begins to evaporate in your mind, focus on the deep quiet that followed that storm, to ensure that the world would never again come so close to the edge through a misunderstanding. A direct line of communication was established, the hotline between Washington. It was not a weapon, but a bridge. It was a realization that even in the deepest of divide, the ability to speak and to listen is our greatest protection. The cold, hard steel of nuclear politics began to soften, replaced by a renewed, fragile hope for peace. Kennedy had stared into the very abyss of the future and pulled us back, not with a sword, but with a steady heart and a patient, enduring mind. You are a part of that peace tonight. The crises of the past have long since settled into the soil of history, providing the calm, solid foundation for the world you inhabit now. Let the lingering thoughts of the 20th century become as soft and translucent as the glass in your windows. You are floating away from the corridors of power, drifting toward a much older, much warmer part of the human story. The cold marble of Washington and the dark, churning waters of the Pacific are fading away into a soft blur. They are being replaced by the mental image of sun-drenched hills and the ancient, rhythmic pulse of the earth itself. We are moving away from the high-stakes decisions of presidents and toward a simpler, more sensory ritual. A journey that has no doomsday clock, only the rising and setting of the sun. It is a transition from the heavy weight of command to the gentle, rising aroma of the land. Imagine the shift from the metallic cold of politics to the earthy, sun-warmed highlands of East Africa. We are traveling toward a place where time moves according to the seasons, a land of wild green shrubs and bright red berries. From the silent modern battles of a leader, we find ourselves drawn to the legendary discovery of a small fruit that would eventually stir the entire world into wakefulness. The transition is as smooth as the surface of a calm, mountain lake. We are leaving the steel and the struggle behind, moving toward a history that is felt through the senses, through the scent of the soil, the heat of the fire, and the quiet comfort of a shared cup. In the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, a journey is beginning that will connect a lonely monk in his cell to a revolutionary in a smoky cafe, and eventually to the quiet, early morning stillness of your own home. But for now, there is only the scent of the dry earth and the promise of a story that begins with a curious shepherd and his dancing goats, under a sun that has been shining, steady and warm, for 1,000 years. Long before the modern world hummed with the mechanical hiss of espresso machines and the hurried footsteps of morning commuters, coffee began its remarkable journey in a place of ancient, untouched stillness. Imagine yourself transported now to the sun-drenched highlands of Ethiopia. The air here is thin and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth, wild moss, and the green waxy leaves of shrubs that have grown here since the beginning of time. In this place, time does not move in minutes or seconds. It follows the rhythmic pulse of the seasons and the slow, steady arc of the sun as it travels across a vast, unbroken blue sky, according to a legend whispered through the centuries. It was a curious young goat herder named Kaldi who first noticed a strange, energetic shift in his quiet world. He watched with growing wonder as his flock, usually so calm and predictable, began to leap and bound with an unusual, playful vitality after nibbling on the bright red berries of a certain wild shrub. They moved as if they had been struck by a gentle, invisible lightning, bleating and dancing through the emerald hills like they'd been infused with the very spirit of the sun. Kaldi, intrigued and perhaps a little wary, decided to try the berries for himself. What followed, the story claims, was a sudden burst of clarity and a quiet sense of wakefulness that would eventually change the course of human history. Though the story of Kaldi and his hyperactive goats may be more myth than fact, historians agree that the true roots of coffee do indeed trace back to the ancient forests of Ethiopia. The plant, Coffea arabica, is native to this high-altitude region, growing wild for centuries under the shade of much larger trees. Long before anyone imagined brewing a dark liquid, the local people likely chewed the raw beans or mixed them with animal fats to create an early form of energy, by-day sustenance for the long journeys across the African terrain. Take a slow, deep breath and visualize those green hills shrouded in the morning mist. The berries are a vibrant, glowing red against the deep green leaves. There is no rush here. The goats graze, the sun rises, and the secret of the bean waits patiently to be discovered. You are safe in the present, just as the highlands were safe in their ancient solitude. The world of tasks and deadlines is thousands of miles away, replaced by the simple earthy reality of a wild shrub growing in the silence of the mountains. From the highlands of Ethiopia, the bee made its way across the Red Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, finding a new and profound identity in the lands of Yemen. By the 15th century, coffee had undergone a transformation. It was no longer just a wild stimulant to be chewed. It had become a drink prepared through the careful processes of roasting and brewing a form much closer to what we recognize today. It was here, in the dimly lit chambers of Sufi monasteries, that coffee found its spiritual soul. The Sufi mystics embraced this dark, energizing liquid as a sacred tool to aid in their all-night rituals, helping them remain awake and focused during their chants and deep meditations. They called the drink kawa, a word that had once been used for wine, signaling the deep seriousness and reverence with which it was regarded. Imagine the scene, the rhythmic chanting of prayers echoing off stone walls, the soft flicker of oil lamps, and the deep comforting aroma of freshly roasted beans rising through the air. Coffee in this context was divine, fuel a bridge between the mundane world of the body and the spiritual world of the mind. As the bean traveled north to the great cultural centers of Mecca, Medina, and Cairo, it gave rise to something truly revolutionary. The coffee house, known as the Cave Cane. These establishments were not just places to grab a quick drink. They were the birthplaces of modern social life, the schools of the wise. Men gathered on low, comfortable benches to discuss religion, politics, philosophy, and poetry. Coffee became the drink of thought, a constant companion to the intellect. Nowhere did this coffee culture flourish more brilliantly than in Istanbul, the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire. By the 16th century, coffee houses were a cornerstone of urban life, lavishly decorated spaces where chess matches and intense philosophical exchanges took place under arching tiled ceilings. The Ottomans elevated the preparation of coffee into an art, refining roasting techniques, and creating a sezve, the small copper pot that allowed for a thick, foamy brew. As you settle further into your pillows, imagine the warmth of that ancient Istanbul cafe. The voices are a low, rhythmic murmur in a language you don't need to understand. The scent of the roast is thick and comforting, a constant presence that anchors you to the room. But even here, coffee faced its struggles. Some authorities feared that too many awake minds in one room might lead to political unrest. Coffee houses were periodically banned, accused of breeding sedition. Yet, the popularity of the bean was too strong to be suppressed. People smuggled beans and brewed in secret until the bans were eventually lifted, and the sultans themselves became avid coffee drinkers. In less than a century, coffee had evolved from a monk's aid to a cultural cornerstone, bringing people together in the spirit of hospitality and pride. For centuries, the Arab world guarded the secrets of coffee like a state treasure, ensuring that no fertile seeds could be taken elsewhere to sprout. But in the 1600s, that wall of exclusivity began to crack. According to legend, an Indian Sufi named Baba Budan visited Mecca on a pilgrimage and became enchanted by the drink. On his return journey, he performed a daring act of botanical smuggling, strapping 7 raw coffee seeds to his chest, hidden beneath his robes. He planted them in the hills of southern India, unknowingly setting off a global transformation that would lead to entire coffee empires. At the same time, European merchants were becoming deeply curious about this black gold. Soon, coffee found its way into the great ports of Venice, London, and Amsterdam. At first, it was treated as an exotic medicinal tonic, sold by apothecaries to cure everything from melancholy to gout. But coffee did not remain a curiosity for long. By the mid-17th century, coffee houses were sprouting across Europe, echoing the social spirit of the Ottoman world. In London, these establishments became known as penny universities. For the price of a single penny, any man could enter and sit among merchants, scientists, and poets to engage in lively discussion. Coffee fueled the minds of the Enlightenment. It was the sharp, liquid fuel of reason. Unlike the dark taverns of the time, which dulled the senses with ale, the coffee house sharpened the wit and quickened the speech. Imagine the scene in a 17th century London cafe. The air is filled with the smell of coal fires and roasting beans. Isaac Newton and Edmund Halley are sitting at a wooden table, debating the laws of gravity and the paths of comets over steaming cups. Lloyd's Coffee House became the birthplace of modern insurance, and across the street from Westminster, members of Parliament sipped coffee before heading into heated debates. In France, The cafe became a salon for revolution. By the time the French Revolution neared its boiling point, places like the famous Café Procope in Paris were buzzing with fiery speeches and the reading of radical pamphlets. It hosted the likes of Voltaire and Rousseau, who drank their coffee and dreamed of a world defined by liberty. Even in the American colonies, coffee became a quiet act of rebellion. After the Boston Tea Party, drinking coffee became a mark of independence from British rule. The Continental Congress met over coffee, and George Washington was said to be an avid drinker. A cup of coffee, in the right hands, was often more powerful than a sword. It didn't require wealth or a title. It welcomed anyone with a mind to speak. It was a democratizing force, one cup at a time, helping to spark revolutions and shape the modern world. As you drift closer to sleep, think of that quiet power, the power of an idea shared over a warm drink. You are safe in the peace that those revolutions eventually brought. The world is at rest, and the fire of the Enlightenment has settled into a soft, glowing ember. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, coffee transitioned from a colonial export to a modern necessity. With urbanization and industrialization, it became the fuel of the worker in the factory and the office. The invention of the espresso machine in 1901 by Luigi Pizzera changed everything, allowing for a concentrated, invigorating shot of coffee in just seconds. Espresso culture in Milan and Rome was brisk and efficient coffee for the modern age. In America, mass production made it accessible to everyone, from the diner to the soldier's ration. Coffee became a symbol of routine and comfort amidst the chaos of a changing world. But in the late 20th century, a quieter revolution began the third wave of coffee. This was a movement of reverence, treating coffee not as a mass-produced commodity, but as a craft. It treated the bean like wine, a product of its specific soil and climate. Roasters began to form direct relationships with the farmers in places like Ethiopia and Brazil, ensuring transparency and sustainability. Coffee was no longer anonymous. It had a name, a place, and a face. Breathe deeply now, and let your mind rest on the sensory details of this modern ritual. Picture a dark porcelain cup resting on a smooth wooden table. The steam rises from it in thin white veils, curling slowly toward the ceiling before vanishing into the air. This cup is a bridge, a connection between the mundane world of tasks and a deeper world of thought and comfort. It has inspired composers like Beethoven, who reportedly measured his morning coffee by counting out exactly 60 beans per cup. It sustained the writers of the Beat generation and the grunge musicians of Seattle as they chased their own truths. Coffee has always asked the same quiet question: what if? And it offers a focused kind of euphoria, a feeling of being awake not just in the body, but in the spirit. As we look toward the future, the bean faces challenges from a changing climate, yet it continues to adapt and thrive. It remains a global cross-pollination of cultures, from Japanese pour-over techniques to the revival of ancient Ethiopian ceremonies. But as the scent of the roast begins to fade into the background of your mind, the journey of the bean concludes. We leave the sensory warmth of the highlands and the bustling cafes behind. The transition is a slow, seamless drift, away from the aroma of the cup and toward the cold, steadfast resolve of the blade. Before the arrival of the coffee house and its lively debates, there was a different kind of gathering in the heart of the medieval world. A brotherhood defined not by ideas, but by the weight of iron and the sanctity of an oath. We move now from the liquid gold of the brew to the sacred, ironclad world of the night, and a code of honor that was being forged long before the first berry was ever picked. As the rich, earthy aroma of the coffee bean begins to drift away into the soft recesses of your mind, replaced by the cool, crisp, metallic tang of the early morning air. We travel further back into the long, deep shadows of the path. Imagine the landscape of Europe in the silent centuries following the collapse of the Roman Empire. The old order, with its grand marble columns, sprawling villas, and paved roads that once led to the heart of the world, has vanished like mist in the sun. In its place, the continent has splintered into a patchwork of warring kingdoms, small fiefdoms, and vulnerable territories. In this fractured world, where boundaries are drawn in the soil and protected by the strength of a man's resolve, a new kind of order was born out of absolute necessity, an order that was harsh, unstable, and defined by the heavy weight of iron. To survive in this era of uncertainty, where danger could emerge from any forest path, rulers relied on a new class of elite warrior, the knight. But before we look upon the knight as the noble, shining figure of legend, we must see him as he first appeared in the dust of history. The earliest knights were not the chivalrous figures of virtue we imagine today. They were hired muscle, mercenaries on horseback clad in heavy, clinking chainmail, loyal not to a high moral code, but to the gold and the land promised by their lords. This was a time of raw power, defined by the introduction of the stirrup from the East, a simple invention that allowed a warrior to sit firmly on his horse, transforming the man and his steed into a singular, unstoppable force of nature. Armored cavalry became the backbone of medieval warfare, and with this rise in importance came a steady rise in status. Take a deep, slow, and deliberate breath now. Feel the weight of this ancient era settling around you, but without its tension. Imagine the cool, gray stone of a fortress wall under your hand, its surface rough and weathered by 1,000 storms. The air is damp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. But inside these walls, there is a growing desire for something more than just survival. There is a call for a code, a conscience for the blade. This was the slow, patient birth of chivalry, not as a romantic fantasy, but as a practical solution to a violent world. You are safe in the knowledge that even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity seeks a path toward honor and restraint. To become a knight was not a matter of birth or wealth alone. It was a long, disciplined journey that shaped both the body and the soul. It began in the soft, quiet light of childhood, far away from the noise of the battlefield. At the age of 7, a noble-born boy was sent away from the comforts of his family to live in the household of a great lord. He became a page, and his life was suddenly defined by the quiet, daily discipline of service. He learned the fundamental truth of the code, that before one can ever hope to command, one must first learn the art of serving others. Picture a young boy moving through the long, drafty stone halls of a medieval castle. The floors are covered in fresh rushes, and the rhythmic sound of his small footsteps echoes against the high, vaulted ceilings. As a page, his days were filled not with weapons, but with the study of grace. He learned the intricacies of table manners, the reading of Latin prayers, and the refined basics of etiquette. He practiced his physical agility through riding horses and basic sword play with wooden sticks. But his most important lessons were those of obedience and humility. He was a vessel being slowly prepared, a mind being sharpened by the quiet habits of respect. By his early teens, the page transitioned into the role of a squire, a time of intense and physically demanding training. Under the watchful eye of an older, seasoned knight, the squire learned the intricate arts of combat, the fluid motions of swordsmanship, the steady aim of archery, and the maintenance of complex armor and powerful steeds. He was no longer just a servant, he was a shadow to his knight, accompanying him into the fires of conflict to tend to wounds and witness the true, heavy cost of warfare. But the code required a balance. Squires were also expected to learn music, poetry, and the refined behavior of the court. They practiced the art of courtly love, a chivalric devotion that demanded patience, eloquence, and respect. These lessons shaped the knight not only as a fighter, but as a man of grace and wisdom. Listen to the steady, rhythmic sound of the training yard in your mind, the muffled strike of wood on wood, the heavy synchronized breathing of the squires as they move in unison. This is a world of preparation and patience. The soul of the warrior is being quieted, his ego being tempered by the weight of his future duties. You are resting in that same sense of discipline. Your day is done, and like the squire at the end of a long day of training, you have earned this moment of absolute quiet. The iron is cool now, and the world of noise is fading away. When a squire had proven his loyalty and his skill through years of steadfast service, he arrived at the most sacred threshold of his life, the night of his dubbing. This was a rite of passage filled with deep symbolism. It began with a ritual bath, a purification intended to wash away the sins of his past and represent his readiness for a new, virtuous life. Afterward, he dressed in a white tunic to represent purity, a red robe for the courage to shed blood in service, and a black cloak to signify his humility and his readiness to face the end of his days in duty. Imagine the squire now, standing alone in a vast, silent chapel on the eve of his knighthood. The air is cool and smells of ancient stone and beeswax. He begins his vigil, a night of solitary prayer before the altar where his sword and armor rest. The only light comes from the flickering flames of a few tall candles, casting long dancing shadows against the arched stone wall. He kneels on the cold floor, his head bowed, his mind focused entirely on the vows he is about to take. This vigil is a final moment of reflection, a time to confront the silence and ensure his heart is ready for the burden of the code. Breathe in the stillness of that chapel. Feel the absolute peace of the night as the squire waits for the dawn. There is no fear here, only a profound sense of purpose. As the first light of morning begins to filter through the high windows, the ceremony begins. A priest blesses the sword, asking that it be used for justice and protection, never for cruelty. Then the lord or king performs the accolade, a light, symbolic tap on each shoulder with the flat of the blade. With those silent strikes, the squire is gone, and a knight is born. He swears a sacred oath to protect the innocent, to remain loyal to his lord, and to uphold the truth above all else. The sword no longer belongs to him alone. It belongs to the code. This ceremony brought a rare clarity to a world of violence. It drew a sharp line between raw, unchecked force and disciplined, moral virtue. The knight was now responsible for the power he wielded. As you drift further into sleep, let that sense of responsibility and order surround you. You are protected by the same ideals that once guarded the medieval world. The armor is heavy, yes, but the soul within it is calm and steady, anchored by a promise that cannot be broken. Though the knight was forged in the solitude of his vigil, he lived in a world of unbreakable brotherhood. He was rarely a solitary figure, riding instead in companies and serving in retinues where loyalty to his comrades was a matter of life and death. These men trained together, bled together, and rode side by side into the chaos of battle. Each knight knew that the man to his left was the only thing standing between him and the dark. This camaraderie was the heart of the chivalric life, a trust in both steel and soul that lasted a lifetime. Even on the battlefield, where blood was cheap and chaos reigned, The code of chivalry demanded something radical: restraint. A true knight was expected to give quarter to a defeated enemy, to spare a fellow noble who yielded, and to treat him with the dignity he deserved. This wasn't only about compassion, it was a sacred custom. The battlefield was seen as a test of strength between equals, not a license for cruelty. Surprise and deception were the tactics of lesser men. A knight fought openly, his coat of arms displayed proudly for all to see. Think of the quiet respect between enemies after the dust of the lists has settled. In victory, a knight was to be gracious, often lifting his opponent from the earth and helping to bind his wounds. Honor didn't end when the fighting stopped. That was when it mattered most. For the knight, war was a sacred duty, and how he fought revealed the true nature of his character. He was bound by loyalty to his lord, a sacred relationship sealed by solemn vows and witnessed by the divine. To break that oath was more than a disgrace, it was a betrayal of his very identity. As the medieval world moved into the centuries of gunpowder and standing armies, the physical role of the knight began to fade. Cannons and firearms rendered his plate steel armor useless, and the old battlefield of glorious charges gave way to the faceless volleys of professional soldiers. Honor meant little when death came from a distant shot across the smoke. But while the Iron Knight disappeared from the field, the code of chivalry did not vanish. It transformed into legend, preserved in the stories of King Arthur and the ballads of troubadours. It became a moral compass for the generations that followed, a standard by which we measure a person's worth not by their wealth, but by their integrity. Today, the essence of the knight survives in the way we speak of doing the honorable thing, and in the quiet ways we choose mercy over revenge. It is the idea that strength should be ruled by conscience, and that power should be used for protection. The figure of the noble knight still rides through our literature and our modern myths. A lone figure who stands for what is right, even when the world around him falters. Dignity, as the knight taught us, is not found in rank or lineage, but in how we treat the vulnerable. As you sink deeper into the stillness of the night, carry that invisible armor with you. You are brave, you are loyal, and you are at peace. The knight's sword is sheathed, and the banners have been lowered for the evening. The world of iron and oaths is now a distant, comforting memory, a long echo of a time when honor was the highest law. You are exactly where you need to be, protected by the silence and the strength of your own rest. The heavy clatter of the medieval world is softening now, dissolving into a much gentler, more rhythmic sound. The iron of the knight's blade is fading, replaced by a material of a completely different kind, one born not of hammers and anvils, but of fire and the simplest of sands. We are moving away from the world of heavy plate and into a world of absolute clarity and light. As the iron of the knight's armor cools and disappears into the shadows of history, a more transparent miracle is being forged in the intense heat of a distant furnace. We drift now toward a history that is not about the physical strength of a sword, but about the profound power of vision. A story that begins with a single, humble grain of sand and ends by revealing the very secrets of the stars themselves. As the clatter of heavy iron and the lingering echoes of medieval oaths begin to fade into the soft, velvet silence of the deep night, we arrive at a story of a different kind, a story not of physical strength, but of absolute clarity. Imagine the world around you dissolving for a moment, the heavy stone walls and the cold steel blades melting away like mist, replaced by the simplest and most humble of elements: sand, fire, and a touch of ancient chant. Glass, for all its modern elegance and liquid-like clarity, was born in the heart of chaos, long before human hands ever learned to whisper to the flame or shape the molten glow. Nature was already performing its own silent, powerful alchemy. Imagine a vast, empty desert stretching out under a sky heavy with the weight of a summer storm. A single, sudden bolt of lightning strikes the dunes, a searing arc of unimaginable heat that, in a fraction of a second, fuses the silica in the sand into a fragile, branching tube of natural glass. Or perhaps visualize the molten fury of a deep earth volcano, where the planet's internal heat unleashes obsidian, a jet black, razor-sharp glass that our earliest ancestors once viewed as a precious gift from the gods. To hold a piece of obsidian was to hold the cooled fire of the earth itself, a material used for sacred tools and blades that were valued far above any gold. This was the beginning of our relationship with the transparent journey that started with the violent energy of nature and moved toward the steady, patient craft of the human hand. Take a slow, rhythmic breath now and feel the stillness of your own room deepening. Imagine the heat of those ancient, primordial fires finally cooling down, the glowing orange liquid hardening into a smooth, cold, and mysterious surface. You are safe in the present, just as the first glassmakers were captivated by the sheer wonder of their accidental creation. Sometime around 20 BCE, in the heat-baked lands of Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt, people discovered that sand, when mixed with the right minerals and heated to unimaginable temperatures, did not just crack or blacken, it melt. And when it cooled, it became something the world had never seen. A glossy, vibrant material that seemed to capture and hold the very light of the sun. This earliest man-made glass was thick and cloudy, as opaque as a rare gemstone, shimmering in shades of deep cobalt blue and earthy, mossy green. It was a luxury of the highest order, molded into tiny beads and amulets for kings and priests, who saw in it a jewelry made of fire. As you settle further into your pillows, let your mind drift to the workshops of ancient Egypt. Here, artisans used a painstaking technique called core forming, rolling threads of hot glass around a clay core to create miniature, colorful vessels for sacred perfumes and oils. Each piece was a unique masterpiece, a trade secret protected like buried treasure. But as the centuries turned, glass was destined to become something far more profound than mere decoration. It was destined to become the very medium through which we would learn to see the world. Around the 1st century BCE, in the eastern regions of the Roman Empire, a technological breakthrough occurred that would forever alter the path of human vision. The discovery of glass blowing. Imagine a craftsman dipping a hollow metal tube into a glowing pool of molten glass, drawing out a small, radiant blob, and with a single steady and patient breath, inflating it like a delicate balloon. Suddenly, glass was no longer a rigid, restricted luxury for the elite. It became faster to produce, thinner, and far more versatile. The Roman Empire, with its vast roads and bustling cities, became the perfect environment for this innovation to explode. Roman glassblowers made everyday cups, flasks, and jars that passed through common hands, bringing a touch of fire-born beauty into the homes of the middle class. But perhaps the most remarkable leap was the discovery that by adding manganese dioxide, they could decolorize the glass, reducing the greenish tint of the sand and creating a pale, almost clear paint. For the first time in human history, people could see through glass, not just at it. Think of the very first glass window, a cloudy, irregular sheet cast in a Roman bathhouse. It let in the filtered sunlight while keeping out the biting wind and the damp rain. Buildings no longer had to rely solely on open air or wooden shutters. Light could now be invited indoors through sheets of transparent stone. This was the dawn of a new era of light, a concept that would reach its spiritual peak centuries later in the soaring Gothic cathedrals of Europe. Imagine standing in the silent center of a great cathedral, where massive stained glass windows act as portals to a higher world. Light, transformed by the minerals in the glass, becomes a sacred presence, bathing the stone aisles and candlelit altars in celestial shades of deep ruby red, sapphire blue, and glowing gold. These windows were more than art. They were sermons in glass, capturing the essence of eternity for those who walked beneath them. The cathedral stood as a monument to what happens when stone reaches for heaven, and glass finally lets heaven in. As you drift further into total relaxation, let your mind rest on the quiet, steady advance of science. Glass makers eventually learned to grind and polish their creations with mathematical precision, discovering that glass could not only transmit light, but bend it to our will. This simple action gave rise to the lens, one of the most powerful tools ever devised by the human mind. In the 13th century, the first reading stones allowed aging scholars to study their sacred texts more clearly, and soon spectacles appeared, preserving the wisdom of the world for years longer than nature intended. But then, in the 17th century, the lens was turned toward the ultimate frontier. Imagine Galileo Galilei looking through a simple tube of shaped glass and seeing what no human had ever seen before. The rugged mountains on the moon, the phases of Venus, and the moons orbiting Jupiter like a miniature solar system. At the same time, Dutch lens makers were turning the glass inward, creating microscopes that revealed a hidden world teeming with life in a single drop of water. Glass had become a literal extension of the human eye, sharpening our vision and forever altering our perception of the infinite and the infinitesimal. It turned vague theories into visual proof, and curiosity into absolute clarity. Then came the miracle of the mirror. In the 14th century, the master craftsmen of Venice developed a secret method of coating flat glass with a silver-like amalgam, producing the first modern-style mirrors. Before this, a person saw only a dark, blurred reflection in water or polished bronze. But with the glass mirror, humanity could look into its own eyes and see identity. It brought a new era of self-awareness and introspection, changing how we saw our faces, our grooming, and even our souls. For the first time, we didn't just use glass to see the world. We used it to see who we were within that world. Listen to the absolute stillness of your room now. The history of glass is a history of expanding horizon. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution brought the Crystal Palace, a vast, gleaming hall made almost entirely of glass and steel that looked like a shimmering vision of the future. Glass became the signature of progress, making our buildings breathe and creating a conversation between the inside and the outside. But as we moved into the 20th century, glass made its most intimate and invisible leap. It became the very medium of global information. We no longer just look through glass. We live within its digital shimmer. Think of the ultra-pure glass threads of fiber optics, thinner than a human hair, yet carrying massive amounts of data across the deep oceans and pulses of light. Glass provides the sterile, sealed environment for the electrons to dance in our devices, and it serves as the touch-sensitive interface for our modern lives. It is a silent, transparent partner in the digital revolution, fragile enough to break, yet strong enough to carry the collective weight of all human knowledge. Today, we see smart glass that changes with the light and bioglass that heals our bodies, proving that the story of sand and fire is far from over. As you sink deeper into your bed, realize that glass has never lost its ancient, mystical soul. We still look through it for the morning light. We still hold it to our eyes to see the world more clearly. And we still find a quiet wonder in its shimmer. It is a material born of chaos that has brought us to a state of clarity. From the first lightning strike in the desert to the glowing pixel on the screen in your pocket, the journey of glass is a journey towards sea. The light of the lens and the perfect reflection in the mirror are beginning to fade now, blending seamlessly into the final soft threshold of the night. The clarity of vision is giving way to the gentle, rising tide of rest. All the stories we have told, the silent battles of the president, the warm journey of the coffee bean, the sacred oath of the night, and the transparent alchemy of glass. They have all been windows into the human spirit, but now those windows are closing gently, one by one. The world outside is a distant, fading memory, and the only path left is the one that leads into the deep, quiet dark. The clarity of the lens has brought us here, to the very edge of sleep, where the history of the world ends and the quiet dream of the night begins. The final threshold is waiting for you now, as soft, as clear, and as certain as the night itself. The long winding journey through the corridors of time is now complete, and the words that have guided you through the darkness are beginning to dissolve into a soft velvet silence. These stories, the silent battles of a president, the ancient voyage of a humble bee, the sacred oath of a knight, and the transparent miracle of glass have served their purpose. They were windows into the resilience of the human spirit. And now, those windows are closing gently, one by one. The history we have shared is no longer a collection of facts or dates to be remembered. It has become a part of the quiet, enduring architecture of your dreams. The noise of the centuries has faded, leaving behind only the deep, restorative peace of the present moment. You have honored the past by listening, and now, the past honors you by providing a safe sanctuary for your rest. Like the resilient coffee plant that found its strength in the highlands of Ethiopia before traveling across the vast deserts and oceans to stir the world into wakefulness. You are now in a state of quiet renewal. Your mind, once sharpened by the curiosity of the coffee house or the clarity of the glass lens, is now softening, surrendering to the natural, inevitable rhythm of the night. You are like the one amtihete ashik Vitazios waters, glass forged in the intense, chaotic heat of a furnace, now cooled into a smooth, stable, and perfect state of clarity. There is no more fire to manage, no more struggle to endure, and no more weight to carry. The new frontier is no longer a distant goal or a high-stakes political vision. It is the peaceful, uncharted territory of your own deep sleep. You have moved beyond the need for vision, beyond the need for mirrors, and into the absolute comfort of the unseen. As you drift closer to the edge of consciousness, remember the quiet truth we discovered in the life of the young leader, that some of the greatest and most enduring battles are won in the absolute silence of endurance. He learned to find his strength in the stillness of a childhood sickbed, just as you are finding your strength in the stillness of your own bed tonight. And though we often look for the grand, the loud, and the eternal in our history books, the past teaches us a softer, more intimate lesson. It tells us that the brightest lights often shine the shortest, yet the warmth they leave behind remains etched forever into the memory of the world. The 1,000 days of a presidency, or the brief, brilliant flicker of a lightning strike on the desert sand, are enough to change the world forever. That warmth is with you now. It is the heavy comfort of your blankets, the stillness of your room, and then the steady, unbreakable peace of a heart finally at rest. You no longer need to hold on to the light. The warmth of these stories is enough to guide you through the darkness. Let your breath become as rhythmic and as certain as the long tides of history. In and out, rising and falling, each exhale is a conscious release of the day's burdens. A total surrender to the vast, calm ocean of sleep that has cradled humanity for thousands of years. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the iron oaths of nights and the digital shimmers of modern glass, drifting into a space where time has no meaning and the clock no longer ticks. The stories have faded into a low, comforting hum, like the distant sound of the Pacific waves or the quiet, rhythmic crackle of an ancient, long-extinct hearth. You are no longer an observer of history. You are a part of its silent, ongoing flow. The world of action is gone, replaced entirely by the world of being. Sleep now, for the world is finally and completely quiet. The leaders have sheathed their swords. The scholars have closed their heavy books, and the weary travelers have returned to their fire. The banners of the nights have been lowered for the evening, and the glass of the window is dark, reflecting only the absolute undisturbed peace of the night. You have traveled incredibly far tonight, through the long shadows of the 20th century and the cool mists of ancient highlands. But your journey ends here, in the absolute safety of this moment. There are no more questions to answer, no more paths to trace, and no more horizons to seek. The silence is your home, and the night is your loyal guardian. Breathe one last time with the history of the world, a slow, deep, and final sigh of completion. The light is gone, but the clarity remains. The struggle is over, but the resilience is yours to keep forever. You are home, you are safe, you are exactly where you belong in the great cycle of rest. Sleep now. Let the eternal drift carry you away into the soft dark. The music story is over, and the dream is beginning. Sleep, sleep, and find your perfect peace in the quiet heart of time.